Hey guys, how's it going? Dukevilly, your favorite lo-fi, slow to the draw music YouTuber. It is October 28th as of recording this, and you all probably expected a video around October, I don't know, 4th, 5th. I don't know. Maybe you didn't care at all because I'm a small, struggling YouTuber. But alas, I'm here with a monolithic video, and being slow to the draw and monolithic is quite fitting because we were talking about, of course, more drone-based guitar based music, and this time we are covering basically entirely drone metal. And this chart, it describes itself as the ultimate drone rock slash metal chart, which is a pretty big undertaking for a couple of reasons that I've kind of touched upon before. One, that it is a very tough genre to get into. Two, to be ultimate of such a thing, to be a suzerain of the topic, probably takes a lot of research, especially now that we have Bandcamp fodder and we have dozens and dozens of bands on Spotify, and you could just go on Rate Your Music and look up drone metal, and suddenly you have thousands of releases, as far as I can tell at least. And as far as the genre goes, it's like there's Sun, there's Boris, there's Monarch if you're getting crazy, there is, I don't know, like a couple other bands, but like really how deep does the genre really go to be an ultimate knower of this? And apparently it's super deep, and this gives me one problem with this chart as a whole because it is a huge chart, and it's why kind of tough to talk about this thing. Today I'm reviewing 43 albums, or at least talking about 43 different albums slash releases, and that is simply an absurd amount of drone metal content. And I want to say 10 of these, or a little under 10 of these, are some sort of Sun project or side project, which is a crazy amount, and I will talk about those for sure because they're all very interesting. But the main thing is there are some releases here that are like not even on Rate Your Music, a couple I couldn't even find, and to me it's like, yes, I guess being the ultimate knower of all things drone metal, you would just know every single drone release ever, but the thing is, it's not all that good. This, obviously, if it was every drone release ever, it would be a Rate Your Music page and it wouldn't be a chart. But here it is, a chart. And it makes me wonder, why are there some bands here that you have to download an obscure link to that might give me a virus, only to end up being the most half attempt weak version of drone metal you've ever heard? It just doesn't sit with me right at all, actually. It's like, why would you waste my time like that? And why would an artist waste my time like that? Just too many drone artists really don't know what they're doing here. But the popular dudes definitely do know what they're doing. I would know. I'm a fan of drone metal. I'm a fan of drone music. But I just want to get that out of the way right now because I am going to be covering a lot of albums today. And a bunch of them I'm just going to zoom through because they're not really worth your time all that much. Are all of these potentially worth your time? Yeah. I mean, someone had to make them, which means they spent more time on it than my single listen of them. Because believe me, a lot of these really warrant one listen or even less to really understand. And that's really all there is to it. I'm gonna quit yapping and start properly yapping, I guess. Let's start talking about the actual albums. So we covered all the stuff from before, and we covered the central little intro drone metal section, and then this says More Earth with a band called URR, with an album called The Endless Riddles of Sky and Earth. What this release is this giant lumbering three-piece that sounds a whole lot like Dope Smoker by Sleep, but it is a little different. It's a little bit dronier. It's still one song. It's really long, and it's pretty dense. But the cool thing is there's not a lot of actual droning in here. It doesn't hold out for that long. It's more of just repetition. So if you wanted like Dope Smoker to like repeat the exact same note instead of the exact same riff for a really long time, this is kind of what you're getting here. It's a lot of forward momentum, but it's also very, very slow moving. It's kind of just this brick wall of like these single, really long-lasting riffs. By no means is this album reinventing the wheel. You could even argue it's not that creative, but it is an album with serious muscle, which is enjoyable in itself. So even though it's not the most creative, I still think it's a good album. I think it's kind of worth your time. If you want something like Dope Smoker, then give this one a listen. And if you want more Doom, we go into a band called Omadon with their album 4, which is a massive 58 minutes for just 2 songs, which has a really sick approach. It consistently drifts between these different tempos, which add a whole lot of flavor. It's really heavy and giant, just one of the biggest things you'll hear on this whole chart, and the drumming adds a whole lot. It's also an album that gets even louder as it goes along. It already starts loud and then it gets even louder, which is hard to believe until you actually listen to it. Much like the previous album I just discussed by this one has a lot of muscle too, but I think it's a lot more creative. The density has a bit more direction. It's also just straight up heavier. It is a more punishing album, yet motivating at the same time. I think it's great. It's one I really didn't expect to like that much, but I think it's totally worth your time. And up next is a band called Drowning Horse with their self-titled album. It's sort of like a sludge drone combination here, but don't think of a band like Primitive Man. It really is like sludge metal that just gets even slower. And for me, the production does it no favors. It feels a little bit too compressed. The riffs are not interesting at all. The atmosphere doesn't really build in any interesting direction. There's not really any texture that does anything for itself. It's just okay. It's not horrible. There's some density here, but that's really all you get. And up next is a band called Elu of the Nine with, and let me get this correct, Maurerish Trower Music. Yep, that's definitely how it's pronounced. This album is a massive 2 hours long, consisting of just 2 songs, which is an entirely feedback-driven brick wall of music. It is some of this punishing stuff you'll hear in a really long time, and yet it consistently has a slight bit of momentum. It never dies. And the progression is there. About halfway through the first track, you get some serious Funeral Doom vibes from the vocals coming out so anguished. When it was feeling really powerful and gloomy before, now it feels totally wretched and a little difficult to sit through. It is an album that completely takes its time. It has zero desire to satisfy the listener. That being said, it's not like an ego trip. It's not like something that someone just threw out there just for people to listen to and not care about. This feels distinctly against the listener on purpose. Not like, oh, I don't care what the listener says, and I'm just doing something, spending 2 hours on GarageBand making a drone album. But this one is actually like extremely harsh. The guitar tone is just disgusting. It's completely unrelenting on all fronts, which makes this album honestly great. It's probably the most avant-garde album that I will really like this much until we get into some truly bizarre genres, but this is one of the weirdest albums on the chart that I still gave the time of day. Up next is a classic that literally cannot be ignored with this genre. It's the most popular album of the whole genre. If not, then it's in the top 5 still. Sun with Monoliths and Dimensions. It is so classic. It's hilarious. It really pushed the genre forward. Historically speaking, it's a turning point in drone metal because both Sun and many other proper drone metal band was still so ambient and so spaced out. It felt a bit directionless, but Sun's Monolith and Dimensions became one of the most accessible drone metal albums ever, following their amazing Black one, which was very black metal tinged, going a bit over an hour in length. This one is a very clean 40-something minutes in length, and with totally unique textures, and also a very linear song structure, not just like a brick wall structure of just swelling sounds for the whole time. You know, like you have the first song, Agartha, which starts off with just that super heavy guitar, and then it layers into conch shell and the sort of orchestral portion, and then you got Attila basically telling a story the whole time instead of just throat singing, really. And that's just all the action packed in the very first song. You know, you got the second song, Big Church, which is like a giant phrase, which has a choir and some really insane guitar texture. The third song, Cydonia Hunting and Gathering, is like the doomiest that Sun has ever really been. And the final song, Alice, is a tribute to Alice Coltrane, and it's like the cleanest guitar tone on the album. It is so beautiful. I could talk about this album for a really long time, but I won't bore you. I will sum it up by saying, go listen to it. It's great. Moving on. And up next is Teeth of Lions Rule the Divine with Rampton. If you like Sun and you wanted the original vocalist from Napalm Death, this is exactly what you get. Super interesting little project here, but one that is more decrepit and apocalyptic than anything Sun has done before. You get some of the messiest guitar tones, even like some percussion parts that are just horrid sounding. And the vocals from this guy, they remind me a lot of actually Man is the Bastard. Not the Bastard Noise stuff, but more like proper Man is the Bastard when they were doing songs like Moloch. If you like the song Moloch, you would like this album. It's what it feels like, and it's just so heavy. The opening track pounds away like something you'd hear off of Public Castration is a good idea, and the drummer from Electric Wizard gives the audience nothing. He doesn't do any benefit for the listener except for exactly what he wants to do. This is an extremely offensive and hostile album. The song New Pants and Shirt is probably the most ironic song title I've ever seen because it feels like a completely barren wasteland. Conversely, the song Sinister feels like an actual apocalypse. It's just a dirge that feels horrible and leads out the whole album. This album is great. It's such a cool little pocket of history in drone metal and metal in general. It's probably like the most interesting like British America like metal collaboration in a long time. I think it's a really cool one. I think it's great. It's so cool, you should check it out. And we're gonna keep rolling with this because Sun and Boris had a collab too, known as Alter, an album from 2006, same year as Pink, I believe, and it's a really cool one because it's probably the cleanest Boris got up to this point. I mean, it's the same year as Pink, which is when they were making some really clean music, as opposed to their more low fidelity earlier material. But it's cool because Sun is still doing the really avant-garde stuff. So we have sort of a meeting of the minds here. You know, their playing styles are similar. You get the more linear structures of Boris and the more swamped out textures of Sun. Sun is a louder band than Boris. I would know. I've seen them both, and you get the sheer weight and sonic extravagance of Sun, but you have the more creative songwriting aspect of Boris, as well as some serious, like, unrelenting and really cool atmosphere. What Boris does for drone metal is add riffs, and riffs that slow might feel unrecognizable until you hear Wada crank them out, because she is just an animal. She's insane. It's not as much of a drone metal album as you would expect, as it actually leans a lot more into like ambient stuff and like sort of like interesting sort of textural exploration, but I still think it's great. It's one of the coolest albums you'll get from either band. Feels a little bit like a Boris and Merzbow collab. It feels a little bit like Sun's like White era. It's a cool little piece of history. Of course, this leads into some more albums with a band called Fulci with Dead Lights Red Sky, which this is apparently Fulci from Atlanta, not the one from Italy, which is a death metal band. What we get here is just beastly, slow, one riff stuff. Reminds me a lot of Earth 2. Despite being over an hour long, it passes by very quickly, and it also has a ton of emotion. What you get here is a highly underrated drone metal project that has a lot of emotion as its biggest strength here. It feels triumphant at points, dread-inducing at others, pretty seriously heavy sonic weight, and it's an entrancing drone metal album, which later Sun doesn't do that as much. Boris never was meant to do that in just the sonic gravity, but it was meant to be heavy as an accompaniment to the minimalist riffing. Here it's like Earth. You know, you had the one riff and it's meant to have that tiny bit of momentum, and it's great. It does it really well. And up next is a band I've discussed before called Monarch with 666, and I have to say it is not my favorite Monarch release. Dead Men Tell No Tales I find to be a lot better. Even as a compilation, it's sort of like huge heaviness and silence factor was a really cool thing, and here we get a much more raw album, which is cool in some respects, but the feedback, feels so compressed. It struggles on a lot of fronts. It sounds like a male vocalist this time, which is interesting because I know Dead Men Tell No Tales is a female vocalist, but I couldn't really find any resources on whether or not this was a different vocalist at the time. It's way too long, just not enough going on. I still think it's okay. It's still pretty heavy, which Monarch is known for being heavy. They're known for being aggressive and just filth, but here it's just like, yeah, it's filth, like discardable filth. Up next is Moss with Chthonic Rites, which is an hour-long album. There's a 20-minute song and a 40-minute song. Very feedback-driven stuff. In all honesty, it's just very boring. It's one that I would find easily skippable. It was okay as it progressed decently. It had some decent texture going on, but I don't think there's much for me, or you for that matter. And up next is a band called Sabazius with their self-titled album, kind of a little slightly infamous drone metal group, known for a really long album called The Descent of Man or whatever, but this one is 2.5 hours long, and seriously feels digital. It feels like everything was used in a DAW, so you don't get any of the feedback effects. You don't get any of the things that drone metal is used for. You don't get any of the sheer sonic impact. You cannot comprehend what's good about this thing because it sounds so digital. That being said, the final track is so loud, it's crazy. Like, it's like 30 minutes of like guitar-based feedback, which it's like, well, now we finally have guitar-based feedback here, and it sounds awesome. It's very repetitive, it's very cool, but it's also extremely grating, which on my ears I was like very satisfied with just how ballsy the whole thing was. So I think this release is okay, entirely held up by that last track. It's, if you like Metal Machine music, check out the last track. The rest of the album I don't really care for. And next, there's a sort of identifier on the chart to Mess You Up. And this is a band called Bunker with Bludgeon. This is another drone metal album, as you could probably imagine, with very industrial style drum playing. Even the kick sounds like the electronic kicks from Have a Nice Life, which I find to be very interesting. It drags a little, which is its biggest problem. There is some benefit here, but like once it starts dragging, it doesn't stop. It's got some good low-end feedback, which is also very sludgy, but it's oddly enough not nearly as ambient as Sun or Earth, or even Boris for that matter, because the feedback doesn't perform in the same way. I think this release is okay. Not one I need to return to ever. And up next is a very underrated album. Not on this chart though. For this chart, it's probably seen as like celebrity status. This is Boris with The Thing Which Solomon Overlooked. An underrated album in the discography, especially if you're a Rate Your Music dweller like myself, because this is sort of seen as like the beginning of the end of the golden age of Boris. They just released banger after banger after banger, and it was the first time they ever did like the start of a series, or at least as far as it seemed. Like they did have Heavy Rocks as their third album, but at this point we have The Thing Which Solomon Overlooked, and then just a year later we got a different one, and then we got another one after that. So sort of a series here, very drone metal stuff here, more experimental than stuff like on Amplifier Worship. It's kind of a bit like Absolute Ego. The whole thing is 3 tracks and under 40 minutes total, so it's actually not that hard to listen to. On top of that, you've got probably some really interesting collage elements that don't feel like they show up in Boris's discography much other than this one. It passes by really quick. The bass drives everything. It's kind of a like trudging album of sorts. It's got really cool energy. I think it's great. It's one that you're going to find a lot of really cool textures in, and it's one that engages you far better than most drone metal out there. I think you should give it a shot. And up next is Bong with their second album on this chart. This one is stoner rock. If you like the feeling of Dope Smoker so much so that you would search actively for something like this, you'll like it. But other than that, it's like 2 songs, 1 hour and 10 minutes long, and kind of boring. It's okay, I guess. Now, if you took those albums from before and add loads of feedback, we reach this next section with an album that I find insane. This is Ozonic with Halo. It's an album that actually shows up later on the chart as well, which I will hopefully remember to skip over. But this predates all drone metal and has some really cool history, but it's kind of shrouded at the same time. There's only a little bit of information I could really get for it in terms of like what it is, but what the musical quality of it is truly insane. What you get here is a 2 guitar setup that is effect-laden insanity. It's like they're both improvising over each other the whole time. Imagine the heaviness of Sun, but they don't know when to stop strumming. Like they keep on using it, and they just go crazy. Like they do some more melodic soloing, a lot of feedback-driven stuff. You will have entire feedback-based sections, even some droning here and there, but it is extremely avant-garde. This might be the most valuable album on the entire chart. I think it's one everyone needs to check out, not only as a historical footnote, being something that predates almost all drone metal, but also just one of the most interesting experimental guitar albums I've ever heard. It's got so much going on. It feels completely manic and yet completely atmospheric at the same time. It drifts between calming to energizing to giving you complete shock and horror to being quite soothing again, as well as being positive and negative emotions and switching between different atmospheres on a whim. It's truly a bizarre album and a great one at that. I think it's one you guys should really check out. It's not as much essential for drone metal, even though it definitely sounds like drone metal in terms of guitar tone. It's worth checking out. And up next is Burden with Homage to the Tomb. You probably recognize this looks a lot like Boris's Amplifier Worship. It's based off that. Homage to the Tomb, Amplifier Worship. Very clever. I just saw Boris do their Amplifier Worship set live. That's some heat, good sludge metal stuff there. Really cool droning and stuff. And here we get even more experimental with some random dude known as Burden. It is 2 tracks, 41 minutes of earth-shattering drone metal, somehow, I believe, recorded in some dude's apartment. It's a bit relaxing, entirely immersive, entirely feedback-driven. Like, there's so much feedback, it feels like the guitar is used, like, more for feedback than for anything else. It's completely unrelenting. As far as I can remember, there were like 30 seconds of drums on this whole album, and it didn't want to show up a lot more than that, which was really cool to me. Now, as much as it is simple, it is also pleasing and meditative, and I might sound crazy for this, but I think it's great. It's produced shockingly well. The textures all come through in a way that's really pleasing. It feels like it swamps you out. It's really cool. And up next is a band called Colossus with Bring Me the Head of Orion. It's like one big long song, and it's not even on Rate Your Music, and you can't find a link anywhere, and you have to download the whole thing yourself, and good luck finding it. And it sounds so digital, it hurts. I won't even give it time of day. It's poor. You know, it's one of those on Rate Your Music that doesn't even have a rating or a comment at all. And I look at stuff like that, and it's like, how good could you possibly be if this many people have ignored you? I don't know why it's on this chart. Just ignore it. Sorry, whoever made this, I guess. And a culmination of all of this is Sabazius with The Descent of Man. I did not listen to it. I'm disqualifying it. Why? Because it's like 10 hours long in one song. It takes 20 minutes to even reach the first note. Why? Picture this for yourself. You have a job or perhaps family or even a dog, and you have the giant 10-disc vinyl set of Sabazius's The Descent of Man. It doesn't even exist, but let's just say you have it, and you flip between each one. Like, what do you have to do in your house that whole day? Are you really just going to keep doing chores until you don't care anymore? Like, you really have 10 hours to spare just listening to this thing? Are you kidding me? Why would you subject yourself to that? You don't have something better to do? And I know that's for review purposes, but like, let's say you listen to vinyl and you're like, you know what? I'm going to listen to my Purple Rain vinyl today. Or maybe you could even go crazy and say, I have enough time to listen to Get Up With It by Miles Davis. I have 2 hours in change to listen to Get Up With It. Do you really have 10 hours worth of time? Not a single person would buy this and listen to it in its entirety in one sitting. You can do it for a challenge reason. Maybe you could even go see it performed at a festival, but there's no reason to do that on its own. I'm not even covering it. Up next is it says like add Funeral Doom, and it says to cover the Monument of Urn's discography, which is a band that's only on Bandcamp. And get this, they have like 5 EPs on Rate Your Music and more stuff on Bandcamp. I didn't listen to anything that was just on Bandcamp. I really tried to cover just what was in the little thumbnail of this thing, because there's 4 little covers depicted there that you can barely see because it's a tiny little phone-based JPEG file. I'll tell you this, none of the EPs were bad. You know, they're all decent. I will say, Absence was probably the best one. You get Funeral Doom influenced stuff here, a lot of cool whisper vocals. These are all 1-song EPs ranging between like 10 minutes and like 20 something minutes. This one's really cool because it has actually a really interesting ambient beginning that sort of drifts the guitars in. It's really atmospheric. It's the best progression of any of the EPs. I love how the main riff comes back enough times to really ground you throughout this thing, even though it's 23 minutes long. I think it's a beautiful expression of the genre, a really cool way to feel really creepy. It's kind of, the band knows how to make Funeral Doom seem a little bit more threatening instead of just like sad. And up next is a band called Nort with Galgenfrist. Yeah, that's the one. This one's a little more traditional Funeral Doom combined with drone metal. Very simplistic riffing, really relying on feedback and ambient noise. Kind of a black metal vibe to the whole thing, but it does have that Funeral Doom like destructive quality. It's lethargic, spacious, doomy for sure. The lead guitar has a really ethereal tone to the whole thing that sounds rather beautiful. It's kind of an interesting contrast with the feedback-laden, sort of really rough patchwork that the rhythm section build up. The guitar melodies end up being a bit more sparse, but it feels really disgusting with how much distortion's on the whole thing. Also, the piano shows up a lot on this album, and it sounds great. Every track feels like one giant atmospheric experience, which is really cool. It feels different from regular Funeral Doom, and I like it a lot. I think this one was great. I really think it's worth your time. I would recommend listening if you like Funeral Doom and drone metal. It's a cool combination of the two. And up next, kind of differing from the Funeral Doom section, we have a Seethe with Reverent Burden, which we get 3 tracks here, one of which is really heavy sludge, and the other 2 are leaning a lot more into ambient territory, which the ambient is the real highlight here. It just passes by very quickly despite being actually quite sizable, and it just sounds incredibly beautiful. The way everything is produced and mixed. It's just a blanket of sound. I can't believe I'm saying this, but being 38 minutes long, this album's just too short. I wish it was twice as long because everything feels so short. I just want more of what's here. It's so beautiful. The beginning part is really, really interesting. The contrast is everything to me. So I think this one's great for what it is. It's great. I just want more of it. And up next, we add some dark ambient elements with a band called Attawa, Attohwa, with Havet, which is certainly more on the ambient side. It's on Bandcamp. It's got some interesting drones and one 26-minute long monolith of a track, and it's hard to find much else to say other than the fact that it drones. It is drone music. It's okay. Up next is a band called Taiga, simply said from Italy. I couldn't for the life of me find what a band called Taiga did or was. I looked for this album cover. I couldn't find it, so I disqualified it, which I know I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Why are you trying to reference all these people who don't even want their music to be listened to? You could put anything on Bandcamp. It's not even that hard. So maybe they should put in as much effort as the listener? Maybe, if they want their thing to be listened to. Next, we have a band called Gates with Moths Have Eaten the Core EP. No, this is not Gates, the Dan Barrett and Tim McCouga side project, but it's actually a drone project. Even though it's an EP, it is 37 minutes long. But that being said, it feels like an EP. It doesn't feel anywhere near as long as it could be. It's a cool mix of ambient textures, wandering lead guitars, and booming horns that makes up the predominant textures here, and they're all super cool and leads to a very interesting, almost medieval atmosphere. If you like monoliths and dimensions and you wanted it hazier, more atmospheric, less vocals, this is really the project for you. It's so atmospheric, it's crazy, without any distractions at all. I think it's honestly great. Which after that, we have Continuum 2, which is a Steven Wilson from Porcupine Tree side project, which is cool. He used to be good. I think the latest Porcupine Tree album was bad, but they actually cooked on this one. It's this really repetitive, comfy drone metal with really nice overtones. The second track is probably my favorite. It's got some really cool feedback-based, whispering, sort of ambient style textures. It's really soft, really comfy. The final track makes great usage of a noise build, which actually still manages to feel decently comfy despite veering into more eerie and scary territory. This album is one of the most ambient albums on the whole chart, and yet it's one of the most comfortable, one of the most interesting texture-wise. It's just, it's great. It's just a 12-course meal for your ears. I was gonna say for your mouth, but that would just be a regular 12-course meal. But it's great, you know. If you're into 12-course meals, maybe you would enjoy this Steven Wilson side project. And up next, we have Like Drone Razors Through Flesh Sphere with Dronerexia. It is an album that is a tribute to Sun, made by one guy. It's okay. I'm not going to waste your time. If you're making a tribute to that, I don't think you're part of the ultimate drone metal catalog, but okay. If it was a tribute to like Prince and it was drone metal, then we'd have something to talk about. That would be cool. But this is just, it's like a black metal band being like, dude, like, rest in peace, Euronymous. We're bringing back second wave black metal, and they play the worst riffs you've ever heard. It's, believe it or not, happens more than you'd think. Anyways, speaking of Sun, we have Sun's White 2, and this one certainly is ambient. You get some really long patches of ambient textures that feel extremely ritualistic. It's like cargo cult stuff. It's like you have Attila on this one. This is actually one of his first projects with Sun, just murmuring over and over. And you have songs that go into the 20-minute territory that don't rely nearly as much on the drone metal textures Sun is known for, but instead more ambient textures, more flutteriness. And I'm not talking like Alice from Monoliths and Dimensions. This is like really weird and soft, yet very thick at the same time. It's complex and layered. It feels like a spiritual blanket. It's got awesome atmosphere, and it's a very contemplative album. It's extremely introspective. I can't help but love it. I'm a big Sun fan. This one's great. It's another great Sun album. Is anyone really surprised? Because I'm not. And then we add our final section, which adds noise. Strap in. We're getting there, everybody. This is Sick to the Back Teeth with a release called Full Body Heartache, which is weird because this is a person with an absolutely packed discography. Like, not quite Bull of Heaven, but like, I don't know, a lot of albums. It looked like 100 albums. But this one here is just under 30 minutes long, and it's very genre bending. It's mostly one riff for the whole time, but it's it's this really noisy feedback driven stuff, and when the riff comes in is really interesting because it really lets the feedback breathe. It's the main catalyst of the whole album. The biggest change it has is it's sort of like an A-B-A structure where it just drifts into this giant noise section that just drones on itself for really long. It's sick, but at the same time it's very aggressive, kind of disgusting, just a hostile piece of music here. It's nothing friendly. It's extremely raw at the same time. At the same time, it's also very beautiful. It's something rather impressionistic in a way that is also very relative and subjective. I think it's something that every listener can find their own value in, which I feel weird because it seems like an artist who doesn't put a lot of effort in their stuff because there's just so many releases. Like, I refuse to believe you sit in front of your computer for 12 hours a day doing nothing but making music, because otherwise you'd be broke making such obscure music like this. But Full Body Heartache is a banger of sorts, so it's great. And up next is the Goslings with Occasion. Goslings are a really cool band. I really like Grandeur of Hair. It's sort of a shoegazy type release here, but this thing is just crazy sounding. It does just the weirdest things to your ears. It doesn't even sound like a metal release. It's just like, it's like if you took their rock brand and made it extremely slow at portions that like don't even seem to make sense and almost seem to like repeat a section towards the end. It's really psychedelic stuff. It makes you feel really bizarre. It is seriously broken sounding. It sounds like tape noise. It sounds like vinyl crackle. It sounds like just distortion and artifacts. It's crazy. If I had to give it a genre, I would describe it as harsh noise rock, and different from the way Boris does it. Boris just layers it on top, but here it's like drifts into noise sections, but it's actually really interesting. I will say I have gotten more value out of a Boris release. I feel like this album did overstay its welcome a little bit, but for what's there, it is good. It is very solid. And then the chart wants to cover Azonic's Halo again. Already covered it, so skipping in a very satisfying way. And up next is Boris with Merzbau's Megatone. I covered this on my Boris and Merzbau discography review, which feels like forever ago at this point. But that album I find to be a shockingly good atmospheric piece of music here. I know I mentioned Boris and Merzbau just a moment ago, but this is like the slowest guitar melodies ever, also more noise collage-y bits, and the most shocking thing of all is how consistent the whole thing feels, how it feels like one proper release, one really proper, focused set of dedication to a piece of music. Megatone is great. You can watch my full review of it on the other video. I'm spending enough time here, but I think it's absolutely worth checking out. It is one of the most underrated Boris, and it's also an underrated Merzbau album, I guess you could say. And up next, we have KTL, self-titled. It's on Spotify, which I'll tell you right now, if it wasn't for the closer Snow, this would be a great release. It has the most awful grating textures I've ever heard. In a way that I seriously wonder what the point of making it was. It's like there is some sort of weird, bizarre comfort in a lot of harsh noise music, a lot of energy, a lot of surging effects, but this one is so disjointed, so hostile. It really is a work of art. It's not a great piece of music, but it is a great piece of art. The rest of the album is pretty varied. It goes between ambient and more really, really, really sparse drone music. Or even the second track, which dips into industrial with its more electronic digital production style and a mostly lack of percussion, actually. This release is interesting. I'd say it's okay. It's certainly not my favorite. And if you thought we were done, you were wrong. Up next, we have The Sun with Nurse with Wound with The Iron Soul of Nothing. Gosh, this video is getting to me. And it's a cool one. Kind of an underrated Sun project, as you would assume. It is a bit like White 2, but a lot more hostile. It's almost got like a neo-folk style of bizarre triumph in the style here. It's really cool. So on this one, we get some really beautiful, eerie drone ambient, which is actually kind of surprising for Sun because they don't really participate in that sort of genre too much. I did just point upon White 2, where they did that a lot, but here it happens again, and it's really cool. Oddly enough, for a drone metal band that even formerly used to be a doom metal band with Thor's Hammer, the most doom-leaning part is all the horn textures, which I believe come from Nurse with Wound. It doesn't sound like any other Sun album, and it barely sounds like a Nurse with Wound album. I say that like I know very much about Nurse with Wound, but I would assume more industrial textures on Nurse with Wound stuff. but it is really cool. It does remind me a little bit of Sun and Over with the more synthetic textures and the more beautiful layers of ambient noise, which, if that doesn't sound like a glowing recommendation yet, I'll just tell you it's great. Up next is Clist. I won't even spell it right for you. With Chaos Is My Name. It's an album that makes no sense and was made to annoy the listener. It's 36 minutes of really low effort drone metal that starts toppling over itself. It's like, whoa, it's chaotic. Look at all these things it's doing. It's like, nice. It sucks to listen to. It's poor. Ignore it. Up next is a band called Gola with God Is in His Heaven, All Is Right in the World. I am disqualifying it. It's a 98-minute long drone metal album. The only part of it available that I could find anywhere is the title track, which is the opening track. It's about 2.5 minutes of actually really, really good, really spooky drone ambient here. Like really cool dark ambient. I might try to find this release on Discogs at some point and listen to a physical copy, but like it should be available on like YouTube or something, man. Like I don't know. It's a little on the older side. It doesn't exist anymore. There's obviously no hype for this release. Otherwise we'd all be talking about it. Or someone would be talking about it, but no one's talking about it because it's just nowhere to be found. So you could try to give it some effort to find it, but I don't have time for that right now. And up next, we have a really, really cool release here, a band called Ekthros with Eov, which is Russian for Job. This is a sort of linear storytelling concept album about Job in a really weird, interesting style. It combines like holy minimalism, like drone, like post-metal, spoken word. It is a super cool thing. Not to mention the coolest album cover I've ever seen. Imagine if the story of Job felt way more, well, Russian. You know, it feels snowy and like triumphant and like you're battling the elements. It's such a cool piece of music here. It is an album that immerses you so well, it actively feels like penance staring you down. You are completely locked in by the linear progression of this album. It doesn't linger too long on anything, but the guitar textures are just soaring. They're really cool. In the best way possible, it feels a little bit empty. It feels kind of like Paysage d'Hiver's ambient material, like there's so much space to cover, which this definitely has some Paysage d'Hiver vibes. If you like Paysage d'Hiver, you would like Ekthros. I just wish they released more stuff, and I hope to be able to find a physical copy of it someday because it's actually really cool. This one's great. Great snow music. If you like the snow, listen to this. And I love the snow, so probably gonna listen to it again. Up next is Burial Chamber Trio's self-titled, a 32-minute long project of Oren Embarchi, who's a Sun collaborator, Attila, and which member is this? Greg Anderson is in this one. It's a 32-minute long project. It's cool. It's very ritualistic. It's probably the most like disgusting thing Attila's ever been on, except for like, I don't know, like a couple of the maybe something off Chimera by Mayhem. That's some pretty gross stuff he did. I think he was on Chimera. Was he on Chimera? You get these sort of sliding two-note melodies that are actually really interesting, if you could even call them melodies. But this is an album that is extremely hostile. The dark ambient qualities really sink in. It's truly a scary piece of music. The specific atmosphere it's going for is completely infernal and dark. It's like being in like a cave that is crawling around. It's great, you know? It's really cool. And up next is the final band on this whole chart that I would actually deem as essential. Locrian with The Crystal World. Finally, this really weird avant-garde, kind of vaguely shoegazy band. It reminds me of some of the earlier projects that we covered in the Atmospheric Sludge section, but actually like a lot better. Despite it being far less dense than Sun, these sort of electronics and ambient aspects are really, really interesting. It's definitely more song focused. It is confrontationally hostile, but you have these beautiful ambient elements that provide a really harsh contrast, one that actually is very emotional. It is profoundly alluring and mysterious, yet uncompromisingly harsh when it wants to be. There are tiny pockets of harsh noise in here that are so brutal, it's crazy. It's got really cool post-rock linear patience and really emotional noise, kind of reminding me of I'm a Lake of Burning Orchids, if you remember that little power electronics shoegaze act. I should check them out some more, they're pretty cool. But this one's great. And the final release on this whole chart is Grave Temple, which is the same thing as what I just covered, but instead of Greg Anderson, it's Stephen O'Malley. And you get a weird collage album that tries to be experimental a bunch. It feels like Stephen O'Malley wanted to make something and just put it on Bandcamp. It's a cool experiment for sure, but it doesn't add a lot. The song Ambient 3 is really cool because it's drone metal with a blast beat the entire time, thanks to Oren and Barchi. It's really, really cool. I don't think it's like fun to listen to more than once, but it's cool because everyone thought of like drone metal with blast beats, and here we are. It definitely takes a bit to get good, but the very sparse guitar hits are really cool for what it's worth. If effectively disturbing, it just feels too disjointed, which makes it not as fun of a listen overall. So I think it's an okay one. Still, if you want to be a Sun completionist, it's one to listen to. What I am wondering is why Pen Temple is not on this chart. I'll be a little quick shout out here. There's only a live album by them, but if you took Sun, Oren and Barchi, Attila, and the dude from Streborg, whatever his name was, I forget. I haven't followed Streborg in a while, but you put them all together into a live setting, then that's what you get. You get that whole thing. It's really cool. But that is the whole chart. Here it is. It's somewhere over here. It's gonna be blocking my face. I don't even care. This thing is so huge, and I'm glad to be done with it. I was looking forward to covering it like over a year ago, and now I am so happy to be done with it and moving on to other genres because it's not exactly something you could just bring out. It's so avant-garde. It's so tough to get through. But there were a lot of gems in here, a lot of really good stuff, and unfortunately, they're all just related to Sun and Earth and Boris and like Locrian and stuff like that. But it's cool. Other than that, November is upon us. Get into black metal mode because that's some real heat. That's what we're going to be really into. But that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would love likes down below. Subscribe, please. Comments, question, or concern down below as well. In the description, you'll find the creator of the thumbnail for this video. It's Jen. Thank you, Jen. And gosh, happy to be done. Yeah, that's about it. Hope you guys... Oh, my social media is in the description too, if that's of any interest. And that's truly it now. Have a good day. Bye.